If you are an overweight Christian, then I'm here to tell you that being fat is not a sin. Having excess body fat tissue in itself is not a sin. And even if you've dishonored your body, it doesn't mean God's disappointed in you. It doesn't mean God's mad at you. It doesn't mean you're going to burn in a lake of fire forever with all the other Christians who abused the temple of the Holy Spirit. Having excess body fat in and of itself is not a sin. But even though having excess body fat is not a sin, the behaviors that cause you to have excess body fat, those are sinful. And yes, I'm talking about the sermons that you've never heard a pastor preach on, because most pastors struggle with this themselves and don't operate from a place of victory in this themselves. I am talking about gluttony and slothfulness. Gluttony is defined as the overconsumption of food that harms the body. Slothfulness is the reluctance to work, the reluctance to put in effort, laziness. And these are the two behaviors, the two sins that cause excess weight gain. And I know that you're probably thinking right now, Gabe, I know I've got some excess weight, but does that mean I'm a glutton? And it's the right question to ask, because you're right in assuming that you are not a glutton just because you're overweight. You are not a glutton. That is not your identity, even if you're overweight. That's not who God says you are. But even though you're not a glutton, the behaviors that you've participated in are still gluttonous. So no, you are not a glutton. That's not who God says you are. God says you were created in His image. And a lot of other incredible things about you that we don't have time to get into in this video. But you are not a glutton. But you have been behaving gluttonously. You have been practicing slothfulness. And I know for a fact, there's going to be some of you in the comments who write something like, Gabe, don't you know there are other factors at play when it comes to people's obesity? Don't you know that not all obesity is caused by gluttony? What about genetics? What about circumstances? What about autoimmune issues? What about my upbringing? What about my culture? What about yada, 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 all the stuff? Sorry, I'm not here to shame you. Got a little carried away there. Because I do get it. I understand how obesity is not solely caused by gluttony. I know that obesity is multifactorial. I know that there are multiple factors at play that initiate gluttonous behavior or cause you to be gluttonous or act as stumbling blocks resulting in gluttony. I know that that's true. Okay, but saying that, I have these crazy circumstances, that's why I overeat, or that's why I'm fat, it doesn't mean I'm gluttonous. That's like saying, I've got these crazy stressful circumstances, that's why I cheat on my wife, because of my circumstances. Saying I was brought up with a food addiction or brought up with a culture where we use food as reward, that's why I overeat, I'm not gluttonous. That's like saying I have a super high sex drive. That's why I seek out other women outside my marriage. It doesn't make me an adulterer. I'm not saying that there's only one cause. I know there are multiple causes, but that doesn't discount the fact that you're still behaving gluttonously, even if your circumstances are different than somebody else. I'm not saying this to you as somebody who's never struggled with this. I'm saying this to you because I have specifically struggled with this. I was 30 pounds overweight 5 years ago and change, while actively coaching fitness, by the way. I was calling myself a leader. My body told a different story. And yes, I studied kinesiology. Yes, I know the science, and I teach this stuff, and I have more knowledge than the average person in this specific field. But I also have arguably more intense factors at play than the average person who is behaving gluttonously. See, because where I come from is a Puerto Rican American family, American first, I like to say. My parents are from Puerto Rico. Well, my dad's actually from Gary, Indiana. His parents are from Puerto Rico. But in the Puerto Rican culture, the entire culture revolves around food. All of the social interaction, all of the celebration revolves around food, much like you, likely, because here's what I found. Everybody says my culture revolves around food, but all cultures revolve around food. Whether you're Puerto Rican, or you're Southern, or you're anything else, Indian. All of our cultures revolve around food. So, anyway, that's that. But the funny thing is, well, not funny, sad thing is that although I'm the one sitting here being honest with you and telling you that you're behaving gluttonously, which is why you're overweight, I also recognize that there are other factors at play. The way I was brought up is one of those factors. In fact, I think that in my family, in my bloodline, there's even been a generational curse in the area of health that has plagued the men in my family for generations. Let's talk about that as a factor. To reference my dad, he passed away at 55 years old just a few months ago because of the overconsumption of food that harmed his body. That's how I was brought up. My grandfather also died when I was 16. He got a cut on his foot. And because of how diabetes compromises your immune system, that cut got infected, and he had the choice between amputating his foot or letting the infection run its course. And no condemnation here. There's multiple things at play that I probably will never fully understand, but he chose to let the infection run its course. His life got cut short because of a cut on his foot. Here's another piece of irony. My dad's brother, my uncle, had a stroke 2 days before my dad died at 55 because of the overconsumption of food that harmed his body. In both cases, I'll give you one more. The person who officiated my dad's service of life was my second uncle, my dad's cousin. And the person who was giving the word at the service of life of a man who died at 55, that person, my second uncle, is 400 plus pounds. That's the culture I grew up in. That's the upbringing I had. Those are the generational curses and beliefs and agreements I was up against. And so, trust me, I understand when you say, Gabe, it is multifactorial. Gabe, what about my genetics? I have arguably some of the least advantageous genetics in the world when it comes to not being fat or not giving into gluttony. Because your appetite can actually be influenced by your genetics as well, which is interesting. Let alone your ability to store fat. Let alone your pancreas's ability to process the glucose that you're intaking. So I understand the way genetics and factors and upbringing impact your behavior, but that does not remove the fact that the behavior itself is gluttonous. It doesn't remove the fact that ultimately we give into food, over consuming food in a way that harms the body. So, yes, I know there are circumstances at play. But gluttony, slothfulness, those are the behaviors themselves, and they are sinful. They are not in alignment with how God calls us to live. So here's my advice to you. My advice to you is first and foremost to take some humility into your prayer and just be honest and repentive about the disobedience you've had in this area of life. Because most Christians constantly make a mistake that keeps them stuck and liable to destruction, and that mistake is they don't even have awareness around their sin. And even when they do, they don't have honesty about the cost of their sin. So let's take that repentive attitude, not from a place of shame of you're not good enough, of you suck and you're fat and blah, discussing all the rest. No. Let's take this awareness as a place, from a place of just acknowledging, Lord, this isn't how you designed me to live. I recognize that now, and I want you to transform my mind so I can turn from this disobedience. That's step one. It's not to condemn you, it is to encourage you. Okay? I know there's so much shame around this area of life that comes from you sometimes, that comes from the world sometimes, that comes from the fitness marketing sometimes, right? There are ads you'll see where the bro fitness marketing is literally like, you're such a fat POS, like you need to get in shape so your wife stops looking at other men. That's not where this should be coming from. It's not going to be sustainable that way. It's where it came from for me, and originally convinced myself I was essentially worthless, not a good human if I was fat, if I wasn't the fittest on earth. But sometimes that shame in and of itself can be one of the spiritual wounds that we now are seeking to numb the pain of, and we turn to food to numb the pain of that spiritual wound, of the shame of us being overweight. And it creates this endless cycle. It's like I'm overweight, so I hate myself, so I feel pain, and I want to gain this sense of emotional control, so I eat a bunch of crap late at night. Then I'm overweight, so I feel shame. I feel like a piece of crap, so I eat to heal that one. It can't come from a place of shame. It has to come from a place of, honestly, a fear of the Lord. That's not shame. Fear of the Lord is righteous understanding of how our disobedience makes us liable to destruction. It's a righteous understanding of when we're living out of alignment with God's design for our life. That is fear of the Lord. I'll give you an example, because a lot of people point to the story to say, see, there's no condemnation, there's no shame. And that's true, but they point to this example to kind of justify a lot of behavior. It's the story of the prostitute or promiscuous woman Actually, at this moment in time, I can't say with certain if it's a prostitute or promiscuous woman. Either way, a woman caught in adultery. And the story goes, there's this woman who's caught in adultery, and there's a bunch of Pharisees who are about to stone her. Just need to make sure my camera's still going there. And you can imagine, if you put yourself in this woman's shoes, that if you were in her shoes and you were caught in adultery, caught in sin, any disobedience, imagine what it feels like to have a bunch of Pharisees lined up in front of you, ready to throw rocks at your skull to kill you. Imagine the fear that woman felt in that moment. That fear of the Lord, it's not bad, it's just the natural response to recognizing the consequence for our sin. So there arguably should be a little bit of that reverence, probably more like a lot of that fear of the Lord and recognition of, Lord, I've been disobedient. Lord, I've dishonored my body. Lord, I've turned to food for comfort instead of turning to you for comfort. That fear is a natural response. Now here's where Jesus comes in. Jesus comes in and says, he who has no sin, cast the first stone. And so he puts himself in between the actual condemnation and judgment and punishment that this woman does deserve according to the law. And so sometimes what you need to do is, yes, recognize your sin, recognize that you've been gluttonous, but have Jesus step in to interrupt the condemnation that's been wielded at you that creates more shame. And here's the thing, sometimes the Pharisee who's wielding the stone at you for your gluttony is you. Most of the time, the loudest Pharisee wielding condemnation and accusation at you is you. It's that voice in your head when you wake up in the morning to brush your teeth and you see that overweight body in the mirror staring back at you and you can barely make eye contact with yourself. And you hear that voice, you fat piece of disgusting. Ugh. Usually the loudest Pharisee is you. And so we don't allow these stones to just continue to be wielded at our faces by ourselves. We bring Jesus in. We accept his grace in this area of our life like we do every other. Jesus steps in and halts the wielding of those stones. Jesus will step in and halt the accusations of the enemy who is saying you're too far gone and you cannot redeem this, who is saying it's been 20 years, you've done too much, you don't deserve a healthy body and the blessings that come with it. Jesus steps in and halts those accusations. And here's the cool thing. Once Jesus halts those accusations, he doesn't endorse you continuing to sin. With this woman in this story, he says, go on and sin no more. But it's that grace that's going to energize you to actually go on and sin no more. It's not the shame. It's not the accusation. It's not the fear of punishment. The word says that perfect love casts out all fear. Fear, by definition, in the process of our sanctification, is not the thing that consistently sustains us. It's the beginning of wisdom. But perfect love, understanding that Christ loves you so much that you were given a mission on earth that requires a healthy body, that Christ loves you so much that regardless of what you've done, you're forgiven, that regardless of how you've treated your body, he'll give you the energy to redeem it. It's that level of love that casts out the fear, casts out the shame, casts out the condemnation, and energizes this consistent desire to be obedient to God, to honor our bodies, to be disciplined, and keep the weight off. So I'm not condemning you. But I'm reminding you that if you're an overweight Christian, regardless of the factors that are at play, that do play a role in your current state, ultimately it is the gluttony and slothfulness, the overconsumption of food that harms the body, and the reluctance to work and put in effort that causes obesity. And those are sinful behaviors. And we should be aware of that and repent of that. And we should accept God's grace in this area of our life, because that will energize us to be obedient. That will energize us to lose the weight, to keep it off, to experience the goodness and energy and pleasure and joy that He has for us on the other side of good health, all for His glory and for His people. Hope this blesses you. See you on the next one.